cognitive science study of brain, mind, and psychology. When we started talking about cognitive science in very first lecture, you have seen that time cognitive science covers a number of multidisciplinary domains. The multidisciplinary domains include artificial intelligence, psychology, neuropsychology, neuroscience, anthropology, mathematics, philosophy, physics, and many things. A number of multidisciplinary domains are covered in cognitive science. So the scope of the cognitive science study is also multidisciplinary. The scope of cognitive science study includes study of brain, study of mind, study of psychology, study of psychological impact, study of different disorders, disabilities, different activities, different kind of engagements where we involve ourselves. How do those activities and the conditions impact these areas of the brain, rather the important components and aspects of the human brain, especially the mind and psychology. The ability to learn, the memory, the strengthening of memory, the loss of memory, regaining of memory, recovering the memory loss, and recovering from psychological disorders. All these are a number of areas which are around something which is called as brain, mind, and psychology. So you can see here in the title slide an interesting picture. It says cognitive, psychology, sensation, perception, and attention. So it definitely deals with attention. If there is a loss of attention, if we are paying good attention, that is studied very well. The ability to perceive, how much ability is there in a human, in a person, and is this ability different from one person to other person? How do we sense the different environment and make sense of certain objects? The level of comprehension, the level of understanding is different from one person to other person, and there is always psychological impact. And when we talk about psychological impact, it does not only involve the brain signal processing, but people working in different areas of art, science, and other different domains of science and engineering. They also talk about psychology. So it's the way we think, the way we perceive, the way we, interpret, and then with the way we come to the conclusion. The way might be correct, might not be correct, but based on certain logics and based on certain fundamentals, we come to certain conclusion using a procedure called as a psychological procedure. Something called as mind. We will talk about mind in this lecture, where mind is sometimes considered as a dynamic behavior of brain. So with this introductory note, let's begin this lecture. So whenever we talk about cognitive science, there comes an important term called as visual imagery. So whenever we think about something, we learn something, we interpret something, we memorize something, we recall something, it is always based on some imagery which is created, or with the help of that imagery, with the help of that images, we try to reconnect, we try to recall, or even if we want to store something in our memory, that always is there in the form of some impression called as visual imagery. So individual differences will be always there in visual imagery, together with a lack of understanding. So the imagery will be different, and even the amount of understanding will be different, and varies from individual to individual. Others, one person can think that this is his level of understanding with this image created, but others might think in a radically different way in this respect, and may have other profound effect on theories of thought and the knowledge. So there are theories based on imagery, there are theories based on thought, there are theories based on knowledge. We can understand that my learning is based on some thought and knowledge. My memorization or recalling capability is based on some knowledge base, but some other can think that the understanding, interpretation, and memory capabilities are based on visual imagery. Like you see here, the person is having perception, another person is having different perception. So even if it is visual imagery or even based on some thought or knowledge, it's going to be different. This is a psychological way of, understanding the cognitive science approach of human brain. So see here in this picture that perception, imagery, and overlap. There may be some area where, say, this task is associated with this part of the brain. You look at the color, perception, imagery, and overlap. So there are some areas where perception and imagery both are there. So the actual image has been created wherever there is a overlap. And in fact, some visual image was also created. Like visual features are there, and then some task associated perception and imagery there. There's saliency where there are some salient, observation is there. There also both features are available. As I told you, this particular part might look a little different from what we have studied as a biomedical signal processing. So imagery and brain, there is a very, very, interesting, the terminology that comes related to visual imagery called as vividness of visual imagination. Vividness is a variety, different types of visual imagination. There is an index called as, or there is a, term called as VVIQ, vividness of visual imagination, that correlates well with the early visual cortex. We have a visual cortex activity relative to the whole brain activity measured by functional MRI. So when you actually want to study the vividness of visual imagination, that how much imagination one has in terms of imagery, imagination, visual imagination, how much one has, that is actually correlated, and it can be correlated with the early cortex, visual cortex activity, which is relative to the whole brain. So you can relatively compare that how much vividness, how much, ability to visually imagine something is there, especially in the area of visual cortex and the activities therein. And this is a modality called as a functional MRI, is the actual modality where this kind of thing is studied. VVIQ is developed by a British psychologist David Marks in 73. This particular tool kind of, say, you can say a tool or you can say a metric, which consists of 16 items in four groups, or four items in which subject is asked to consider the mental image formed in thinking about specific scenes and situations. So subject will be given certain, subject will be, asked to see certain scenes, and will also be given certain situations, and the number of items will be there, and those items will be used to create scenes and create situations for the subject. So what will happen, some mental image will be created inside the brain of that particular person, and this is how this VVIQ is estimated. So that was a logic. Like that, you see here that a person can create other visual impression. This person can have a different visual impression. Like this side, you can have a different impression. The actual image is like this, but the impression, the mental image which is created may be different. So it depends on, the definitely brain functionality. Why it depends on brain functionality? Because the visual cortex area and the activities there actually determine how much the person is able to correlate on the basis of the visual image which is created inside the brain. So it's a relative thing, and therefore it may vary. It's not absolute. If it is absolute, the same image would have been created, but it's a relative. So in some percentage, or maybe, in with some minimum correlation or some maximum correlation, a visual image can be created. So brain states are determined by interactions between multiple cortical areas. When you are interested to study different states of brain, it is there between multiple cortical areas and modulation of intrinsic circuit by the feedback connections. The disruption of interaction leads to the behavioral disorders. So there are certain interactions which are supposed to be there. If there is any disruption in those interactions based on modulation of intrinsic circuit, then it may indicate certain disorder in terms of behavior. So there is one approach called as bottom up strength and top down attention. So bottom up means from bottom to up you go, then you gain certain strength. Top down, so this is an approach where you come from top to down, so your attention level may change. So it combines four brain states with both stimulus and attention required for conscious reportability, how much conscious you are. Like normal person requires top down influences to form expectation, and only if signals are very weak, poor lighting condition, the object recognition may be impaired. When there is a lighting condition which is very poor, you may not be able to create the object. Poor visual imagination, memory of visual features, inability to draw from memory, recall and describe faces and objects, notice changes, difficulty to see 3D, magic eye pictures, perhaps are more introvert. These are the things where you can have a poor visual imagination, and you already know about the different areas of brain where occipital, inferior temporal pole, orbitofrontal, prefrontal, premotor, sensory motor, parietal. These are the different areas which are associated with the different activities, and the bottom up and the top down attention combines and can have a number of states related to attention and the strength. So what is extended mind? Philosophers talk about parts of environment, the number of components of environment tightly coupled to our motor and cognitive activity. Please try to understand. Environment which is closely coupled with our motor. Motor means our motory task and cognitive activities, by which we can recognize, we can understand, we can learn, we can interpret, we can differentiate, is all the cognitive one. And with whatever we move certain thing with the help of arms, hands, eyes, mouth, whatever, these are our motory tasks. So motory and cognitive activities are closely coupled with the environment, and when we are able to do that, this is called as extended mind. So beyond the brain, we are trying to think, we are trying to make certain decision, we are trying to do certain motory tasks, and inability to consciously interpret the internal brain state leads to the need to express and recognize them through various body actions. So what happens sometime, please try to understand what is this motory and extended mind. Sometime what happens, that whatever internal brain intends to do the task, whatever the status of internal brain is there, we are not able to understand that, and we are not able to express what actually our brain is intending. In fact, we are understanding, but we are not able to interpret and recognize. So what do we do? That it is done through bodily action. So we can perform some symbolic, symbolic interpretation. That happens with the help of something called as extended mind. Spontaneous thoughts are the main source of knowing, but acting and motor activity also helps to recognize brain processes. So sometimes with the symbols, with gestures, you can convey something to some person, and that actually expresses the thoughts of your brain. But spontaneously, sometimes it's not expressed by the brain properly, so one can immediately express with the help of the either acting or some motory activities. So this is a kind of extended mind. Investigation of these condition or state may elucidate relations between consciousness and unconsciousness processes in implementation of higher cognitive functions. So it is depending on actually the consciousness and unconsciousness. It is going through the higher domain, whether the person is in the subconsciousness stage or unconsciousness stage, which is not true. Even if you are awake, but you are not able to interpret and translate into the language in which you are supposed to, what is being intended by the brain, but you are expressing with the help of some motory and some acting kind of activities is done there. This is the diagram where I think let's try to understand what is extended mind. So there was a work by Andy Clark and David Chalmers, modelthinkers.com is the source of this picture. And the traditional mind view, what happens? You think with your brain. Your brain is like a computer and the source of all cognition. So it directs your body. Brain says that, do this task, do that work. So you are directed by your body is directed by your brain, which interacts with the world. So what happens whenever you perform certain tasks, it is always directed by your brain. So this is conventional way of how do you think by applying the knowledge of your brain. What is extended mind concept? Whatever we have tried to understood with the help of these statements, you think with your brain, still you think with your brain, body and the world. So you do not only think with your brain, but you also think your brain with your brain, body and the world. Means the way you interact, the way you express some gestures, the way you give some acting and motory movements, through that also you can express some thinking. So your brain and consciousness are just part of your cognition ability. So the number of tasks where you can express the things with the help of the motory or the some action kind of the activities. Coming to mental energy, what do we mean by mental energy? Thinking and self-control. Whenever you want to think, you have thinking tasks, or you want to have the self-control, is a kind of consciousness practices. It's a mindful kind of practice which requires mental energy derived from food. So whatever you want to do, I think you know it very well. When you are in critical thinking, the maximum amount of the blood and the oxygen supply goes, that we have studied. So when the maximum amount of supply is required, so you need a proper diet and food to get the mental energy. Higher levels of blood glucose, it requires higher level of blood glucose that reduce reliance on intuitive heuristic based decision making and help controlling the attention. Regular emotions, coping with stress, resisting impulsivity, refraining from aggressive behavior. So let's try to understand higher levels of blood glucose. If it is there, that reduces reliance on intuitive, means you have intuition, you can interpret yourself, heuristic based decision by using certain logic, reaching to the decision, and can have the controlling attention, regulatory emotions. All these will be slightly reduced. Alcohol, it reduces the glucose levels, impairing many forms of self-control. So it also reduces the, it also, it gives the inability to have a control, rather a self-control. It reduces the ability, we can say. Self-control failure is most likely during times of the day when glucose is used least effectively. So whenever there is a, least amount of glucose, that time the self-control will be extremely low in a person. So this is, a kind of energy where the mental activities, your mental tasks, your mental areas, they need energy, they need some, appropriate amount of glucose otherwise. So what I'm trying to say that whatever your aggressive behavior or your ability to control yourself, the being intuitive, expressing the emotions, controlling over the emotions, that also depends on the mental energy, and that is obtained from the blood glucose. So this is an interesting thing. Look at this diagram, which is very interesting. The protective factors are restfulness, sleep, good nutrition, physical activity, mindfulness based stress reduction. Let's go to each one of them. Restful sleep. When restful sleep is good for consolidation of memory. So why do we need sleep of certain number of hours? So that we can consolidate the memory as well as the correct predisposition for learning. It is not only for consolidating the memory, but also predisposition of learning that requires a state of proper alertness. So therefore, restfulness sleep, which is a proper sleep, is definitely needed. Let's go to the good nutrition. I was talking about the mental energy. So good nutrition is equally important. Important relationship between high quality nutritional foods and the development of cognitive learning processes. Remember, it is directly depending on the nutritional food. So what are the cognitive learning processes related to paying attention, memory, language interpretation, ability to learn, understand, speak, and translate into a number of languages. That also depends on good nutrition. What is the next factor is a physical activity. In this particular age, modern age, Many of us, are all the time working with our computing devices, laptops, and the physical activity has been the amount of physical activity has been really reduced for all of us. We have to agree when we compare with, a few years back, maybe 10, 15 years back. A good physical exercise program is essential in improvement of brain development and consequently of the cognitive function. So people will suggest that, if you have a diabetes, if you have a cardiac problem, so do these kind of physical activities, do this kind of exercises. But it affects, the brain health also, because everything is the, every difficulty is the integral part of your body. Say the people are recommended for physical activities for, say, diabetes. So diabetes is related with glucose level, and glucose level affects the brain health, and therefore the physical exercise is a program that is essential. And there are specific exercises which are, used either to enhance the memory or enhance the cognitive abilities. The physical activity is closely related to increased neural network, remember. So what do we do in the computer? We talk about artificial neural network, and then we have a number of models based on the concept of artificial neural network. And you know it very well, more and more the neural network training is done, more and more number of times, more and more number of iterations you use, more and more amount of training it undergoes, it performs better. So in the similar manner, physical activity is closely related to increased neural network, brain oxygenation, and memory enhancement. It is also associated with brain oxygenation, supply of oxygen in the brain, and also the enhancement of memory. The last thing which is very important for the mind and brain is mindfulness based stress reduction, called as MBSR. There are a number of practices all across the world. Sometimes there are some practices which are very much associated with cultures of some society, cultures of some, the particular regions, but there are a number of mindful practices across the globe which are followed by majority of the people. So that helps in improving the health and well-being, reducing the stress, and synchronizing with the brain functionalities, synchronizing with the brain abilities, and also optimizing the cognitive potential. Because everyone, I mean, there are studies and research, that suggests that every individual has tremendous amount of cognitive ability, cognitive potential. But how much we can, use that cognitive ability or cognitive potential, it depends on us, and how much we optimize it, how much, what are the things, what are the practices, what are the factors which are involved in our individual case by which we try to optimize the use of the cognitive potential. Depending on that, we actually exhibit the cognitive ability. So look at all these four factors, which are called as protective factors, which protect our mind, which protect our brain, and keeps very safe and keeps very active and energetic, so that the cognitive ability especially is demonstrated, in a brilliant manner. So that is a purpose of mental energy, and these factors which feed good and positive amount of energy to the brain, so that we do perform a number of, good tasks, and we remain self motivated and positive. This is one diagram, this indicates the number of probes. Generally the investigators, the subjects are asked to go for certain number of, tasks or events. So this picture is actually a good study between persons who are doing some kind of meditations, who have some kind of self control, and the persons whose minds are wandering, means they try always to concentrate, they always try to learn something called as, mindfulness practices. They try to meditate, they try to concentrate, but they find it very difficult, and they find the mind is always wandering here and there. And this is a kind of study. You look at here the first diagram where, these are generally in such cases the number of epochs, the number of times the subjects will be given some events or the questions based on, be calm for 30 second, try to concentrate for 30 second, something like, similar to that. the task or questions are given to the meditators or the subject. So this is a plot where probability density versus percentage of probe, how many probes, how many epochs you have by included, and then how much probability density is increasing in terms of focusing, breath focusing. This is the meditation based on breathing control. Yeah, you also must be aware there are a number of mindful practices by which, with the help of your breath control, you can focus on yourself. And this is something for the same plot with respect to mean level of attention. So your attention level changes. How does your probability of density changes in terms of focusing onto certain thing? This is for your mind wandering, where your mind is found wandering here and there and unable to focus. Then how much is the change? So this is just a sample picture. I'm trying to say that the mind wandering, the ability to focus, the ability to pay attention is based on number of factors, and it is up to us that there are some mindful practices by which we can enhance our ability to pay attention, the ability to focus, ability to concentrate on oneself. This is the sample. Otherwise, there are some articles or papers that talk about the methods, that talk about the mindful practices, which can actually help in reducing the mind wandering and concentrating and focusing to oneself. You might be thinking that what is the use of such studies? When we are unable to concentrate, it means we lose interest from many things. We lose focus on our work, on our task, and our mind deviates from here to there, and it keeps on wandering. So that definitely keeps you in disheartening and discouraging mode, and probably you would be always lagging behind your target. You're lagging behind your success. Coming to neurocognitive informatics. Uh, geometrical model of mind processes psychological spaces, providing inner perspective as an approximation to neurodynamics. Intuition is a learning from partial observation, solving problems without explicit learning. And in the neurocognitive informatics, linguistics are how to find neural pathways in the brain. See, when you talk about informatics, it has to have some model, it has to have some learning, it has to have some linguistics. So it's talking about geometrical models which are there in the informatics. They come from processes, psychological spaces, providing inner perspective. The intuition is a learning from partial observations, solving problems without uh, explicit reasoning. And the linguistics are actually how to find neural pathways in the brain. So like this, you have a diagram where the social support in the cognitive emotional process is a top-down approach. If you remember in previous slide, I was talking about type top-down and bottom-up, whereas physical pain perception, where you compare the subjective painfulness and severity of adverse event, is a bottom-up approach. So availability of healthcare resources, and this side social support. Social support, the resources are called as endogenous, and this side exogenous. Endogenous resources are psychological, internal, goal directed, whereas exogenous includes physiological, physical, external, stimuli driven. So you can understand that the cognitive emotional process and physical pain perception processes contribute to the neurocognitive informatics, where you have a positive adaptation, you have a cognitive appraisal, you have adverse event as well. In related to that, you may have severity of adverse effect, or you may also feel change in the emotion. Now, mind is brain, mind and brain. In the title also mind and brain is included. So neuroscience and cognitive science help to fundamental curiosity about how people think and they learn. The area which is covered in the neuroscience and cognitive science about how do we think, how do we learn, are covered in cognitive science as well as neuroscience or neurocognitive science. The neuroscience is the study of aspects of nerves and the nervous system, which covers anatomy, physiology, chemistry, pharmacology, pathology of nerve cells, behavioral and psychological features depending on function of nervous system, and clinical disciplines or domains that deal with them, such as neurology, neurosurgery, and psychiatry. So you can see that a number of things, number of disciplines are included in the neuroscience, mainly the aspects of nerves. Secondly, the biological, behavioral, and physiological features depending on the functionalities of nervous system. And lastly, clinical disciplines that deal with all these things such as neurology, neurosurgery, and psychiatry. So this constitutes, your mind and brain. And in the beginning also, I was telling you, talking about brain, you have all those areas having functional abilities. But when you actually talk about mind, it is related with the dynamic nature and the dynamic activities where your nervous system or CNS is involved in a number of psychological, behavioral, and physiological activities. And you can, of course, study the dynamic nature of mind with the help of psychological and behavioral or emotional features. So this is, a very good, interesting picture that gives some difference between mind and the brain. There are some questions related to this. How is brain developed? How the brain development happens? What are the stages of brain development? Are there critical periods when certain things must happen for the development of brain? Normally means if you want the brain to develop in a normal manner, are there certain periods or timings which are there? How is the information encoded in developing and the adult nervous system? How does experience affect the brain? I mean, the experience related to a number of work, number of activities, does it actually affect the brain? Are the questions, and all these questions are responded by the neuroscience, which we have seen in the previous slide. So where is the cognitive science? Is the study of mind. If you actually focus on all our lectures we have covered in this course, are all moving around, surrounded by something which is called as a cognitive science. Interdisciplinary science depending on neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, computer science, AI, and linguistics. The purpose to develop models that can help to explain human cognition. Human cognition means ability to perceive, ability to think, and ability to learn. And I think this picture is very common picture, has been included in my previous lectures as well. So the cognitive science covers psychology, philosophy, linguistics, anthropology, the evolution of humankind, the optimization, the neuroscience, and the AI, artificial intelligence. And cognitive science, of course, is the study of mind that is directly related, related with linguistics as well as psychology, in fact, the neuroscience. And you can't say that philosophy, AI, and anthropology are not involved in the dynamic nature of brain, which is being referred as the mind here. Learning organizes and reorganizes the brain. What is the impact of learning in the structure of brain? Organizing as well as reorganizing. Sometimes we say that when we when we are involved in the learning process, restructuring and reorganization of the brain happens. How? The nervous cell or a neuron, which is a cell that receives information from other nerve cells, which we have seen in the brain structure consisting of billions of neurons, are from the sensory organs. So the neuron which receives information from other nerve cells or from the sensory organs then projects it back to the part of body that interacts with the environment. So it communicates back, and the young children can discriminate more phonemic boundaries than adults, but they lose their discriminatory powers when certain boundaries are not supported by the experience. So it means the abilities which are developed and the amount of learning which happens inside, which takes place inside the brain, the structure also changes. The organization and the reorganization take place, and this is actually the structure of neuron. This was very well highlighted in one of the videos which we have seen today, the electrical impulses which are generated. So the restructuring and restructuring, organization and reorganization, that depend on learning mechanism also. Learning plays a significant role. Memory and brain processes, how the brain processes affect the memory. Memory is neither a single entity nor a phenomenon that occurs in a single area of brain. It's actually accumulative and the comprehensive way of understanding the processes. Like there are different types of memory. One of them is declarative memory. Declarative memory is for the facts and events, and there is another memory called as procedural memory. Procedural or non-declarative memory is for skills and other cognitive function. So when there is a procedure involved to memorize something, to store in your memory, it means it is related with the skill and your cognitive ability. So when there is procedure involved, your thinking ability, your ability to perceive, your ability to learn, is developed. So it's a procedural or non-declarative, and declarative only involves some facts and events that create certain impression and store inside the memory. As per the studies, a series of events are presented in a random sequence. People reorder them into sequences that make sense when they try to recall. So whenever you see a number of things, number of events in any random manner, but when recalling, while recalling, we try to, generate certain sequence, and in that sequence we try to reproduce. So it is the, the ability of the memory, the classes of words, the pictures of information that involve complex cognitive processing on a repeated basis activate the brain. So whenever you do certain tasks on a repeated manner, that activates the brain, and memory processes treat both true and false memory events similarly, whether it's a true event or a false, and that activate the same brain regions regardless of validity of what is being remembered. One interesting thing was there in the previous video, if you have seen, there was one area called as a temporal area, which was related with anxiety, pleasure, and fear also. So sometime when the people, the psychiatrist and the psychologist suggest that, when there is a factor that is scaring you, you are having a fear factor. That time you think about some good thing and try to, create the anxiety and create some kind of pleasure, so that you will, because both are covered in same region. So when a pleasure comes, when happiness comes, when sense of pleasure comes, that time your fear will automatically go. So this is how, the memory processes both true and false memory events similarly, because it activates the same brain regions regardless of the validity of what is being remembered, whether it is a true or false. How does experience impact the functional organization brain and the mind depends on the experience. Its development is not merely a biological driven unfolding process, but an active process in which active process always provides you the experience, and that derives essential information experience. Some experiences have most powerful effects during a specific period, while others can affect the brain over a much longer span. So neural connections grow stronger with the experience. Whenever you do something, you gain certain experience in active, task or activities. Your neural connections, become more stronger and stronger, and therefore that experience gives you more memory and other kind of things. This is an interesting picture that also demonstrates what is neuroplasticity, also known as brain plasticity. It's the ability to change and adapt. The ability of brain to change, to restructure, and to adapt is called as brain plasticity. Like there are two types: structural plasticity and functional plasticity. In structural plasticity, experiences or memories change a brain's physical structure. Remember, it happens because interconnections actually change. So experiences and memories change a brain's physical structure. And in the previous slide, there was a discussion about the cognitive ability. Everyone has a strong cognitive potential, strong cognitive ability, but how much one can exhibit, that depends on experiences and the memories, and the active involvement. And this is how, there is a difference between one person and other person in terms of the cognitive ability, in terms of memory, in terms of learning, in terms of thinking, in terms of perception. It is because the memories and experiences change brain's physical structure as well. And thirdly, which is functional plasticity, the brain functions move from damaged area to undamaged area. This is called as functional plasticity. So whenever brain attempts to recover itself, the functions move from damaged area to undamaged area. And this is why when the tumor detection, the cancer detection is taking place, so that area actually, the abilities are always, that area is deprived of certain abilities, but the brain utilizes some other area to do the task to some level, not to the fullest in the normal level. Cognitive psychology, it processes psychological from sensation to knowledge representation. You sense something with the help of your sensory organs and you create a knowledge representation inside your brain. And this cognitive psychology covers experimental psychology, cognitive neuropsychology, and cognitive neuroscience. And the cognitive psychology covers perception, brain sciences, language, development of psychology, thinking and problem solving, human intelligence, AI, imagery. We today this lecture we begin with imagery only. So whenever there is a psychology which is dealing with the cognition ability, it will always include imagery, pattern recognition. You always store some pattern and then you meet a person after 10, 20 years. You try to match with the pattern which is stored inside your memory. And then attention, memory, representation of knowledge. There is a knowledge development, but how do you represent that knowledge? All these areas are covered with cognitive psychology. So psychology is not, area which lacks of scientific proof and scientific studies. These are all scientific domains which are components of the cognitive psychology. The cognitive psychology is contributed by experimental, computer modeling is there, cognitive neuropsychology is there, cognitive neuroscience, and all these are involved in an area called as cognitive psychology. So computer modeling is there because AI is there, the perception is there, development of psychology, thinking and problem solving is there. So definitely modeling will also be there. Experimental psychology, this is a picture that explains, think about problems and situations from your own life. And that psychology, it always enables you to develop or to recover in terms of cognitive ability. Think about things that interest you. Think about things that can make you happy. And this is how you can, forget the fearfulness, forget the stressful situation. And if you remember in the previous slide, it was saying that the fear and happiness were in the nearby area. So the think about something that makes you happy will reduce your level of fear. Pick 2 or 3 ideas or areas within the field and make a list of questions about it. This is how you can psychologically improve your memory. Those experts who teach the children that how to strengthen and how to improve your memory, they give these kind of tasks so that your brain structure, changes, interconnections become strong and the memory gets strengthened. There comes next one is a cognitive neuropsychology after cognitive psychology. So this is already, this has been discussed, the right hemisphere, left hemisphere, reasoning, spoken language, number skills, recognition, visual imagery, creativity. So with the help of these areas, EEG signal can be captured, and with the help of cognitive neuroscience methods and models, one can determine with the help of EEG signal that, and based on from which area you are capturing, we have captured the EEG signal, the behavior of a person, whether the person is passive, assertive, or aggressive, can be determined. This particular kind of research or study related to behavior and emotion is under the area called as the cognitive neuropsychology. Main approaches are cognitive psychology that deals with experimental cognitive approaches and computational modeling. Cognitive neuropsychology, experimental clinical approaches are there, and cognitive neuroscience, electrophysiology, neuroimaging like EEG, and other imaging and neural modeling methods are there. So cognitive psychology, we have already talked about, covers all these domains related to neuroscience, AI, linguistics, anthropology, philosophy, etc. Main domains are there of cognitive neuropsychology: visual cognition to perceive and recognize, attention and resource allocation, learning, memory structures and processes, knowledge representation. Everything was there in the previous diagram. Language development, how do we understand and learn the language development and use of symbols and try to correlate having some impression and pattern. Problem solving abilities covered in the cognitive psychology, reasoning, decision making, cognition and emotion related with effect of emotion arousal on cognition, and effectiveness, the science of learning. That the neuronal connections, I think this was highlighted in the previous slide also. Before learning, see the connections between the two neurons, and when the learning started, the neuron there was a connection or communication between the two neurons. To see the connection here, look at my pointer very carefully. And when after learning, see the connections, more and more points are getting connected. So this is what is called as strong nerve transmission and a strong neural connection. So this happens scientifically, and therefore learning helps the memory, the learning helps the brain, the learning helps the revitalizing the brain, and the way the brain functions. This is a neural network for learning. This is just a simple neural network, how a neural network learns. And you know that more and more number of hidden layers you include, more and more number of interconnections you include, the learning task is always better, and you get your better classification. This happens with the computation of neural network in the similar manner inside the brain also. When you have learning, better is the learning means strengthening, more strengthen, more strong the interconnection is between the neurals. There is one more study on sleep, learning, and memory. Getting a good night's sleep, transferring memories from short-term storage to long-term storage, creating more space into the hippocampus, this area, and making it easier to learn new things. For all these things, there is enough study on sleep that affects the learning as well as making. So that if you want to learn new things, you have to reach to this. And how can you reach to this when you have a good sleep? So sleep also has a good impact in the brain, its functioning. 50 to 70 million adults in US alone have sleep and wakefulness disorder. We have already talked about all these things in the brain disorder and disability as per the reports of Center for Disease and Control Prevention. So common sleep deprivation, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, mood changes, memory problems, hallucinations, and paranoia. All these are sleep disorders, and which could be definitely dealt with by the rehabilitation and other techniques. Sleep and brain health. There are some studies that suggest that the brain health is affected by the sleep. And in fact, there is a study that says that brain's waste removal mechanism takes place during the sleep, and therefore those neurotoxins are removed out via the pathways during the sleep, and therefore good amount of sleep where the neurotoxins that cause unwanted effect inside the brain are removed actually. So this is one more slide where you can see that beta anamide and enzymes are good enzymes are also developed among the toxins that are flushed in beta amyloid. This is area, the protein found in the clumps in the brain of Alzheimer's sufferers. Hidden caves were identified that open in the brain while we sleep, that allows the cerebrospinal fluid to flush out neurotoxins through the spinal column. So the sleep loss undermines our ability to think clearly. When you have a sleep loss, so we will lose the ability to think. And there are studies. I have included the references. So we need to do a lot of research using BCI and biomedical signal processing, studying the impact of sleep in the brain. So this is an interesting diagram I have inserted here. The percentage of the people syllables recalled before sleep and after sleep. So after sleep, the percentage of the syllables which the subjects were able to recall is more. So it clearly indicates, clearly highlights that sleep is very important. And if you don't get the quality sleep, you are going to lose a lot of things. So during sleep, sleep spindles burst of brain waves may be networking between key regions of the brain to clear path the learning. And this is one more study on how do we free up the west neurotoxins that impact our brain. So it would be good thing to rehearse any information you need to remember just prior to going to bed. There is a enough study that suggests that when you rehearse something just prior to going to the bed, going to the sleep, you will always recall it in a better way. So that study is also there. The sleep also, seems to reorganize the memories, extracting the emotional details and reconfiguring the memory. And that also produces new and creative ideas. So there is a study which is depending on which interrelates sleep and creativity as well. Naps which we get, it also help in the learning process. Humans are supposed to nap daily 20 to 30 minutes in ideal. So that also helps. And there is a study, NASA study found pilots who napped for 27 minutes in afternoon improved their flying performance by 34%. So even the nap which we get, that also helps to improve our learning ability. Language is also associated with the cognitive science. The different kinds of languages are related with our visual spatial skills, creativity, analogical reasoning, and the concept formation. It all depends on our brain and its